had this tobacco for easily over a year now. And it's astounding to me how rich it still smells. How soft and humid it still is. I guess it might be eminently smokable were I a smoker. All I know is it's fragrant in an extremely reassuring way that I just can't quite put my finger on. I can't put my fingers on it. Tonight, pretty much all I'm going to be doing is going through an assortment of objects that help me relax, and hopefully will help you relax as well. Smells of vanilla. I can taste it. As we rapidly approach the end of 2021, maybe something we can all agree on is things didn't really, generally speaking, get much better. Perhaps that's not even a goal for 2022. Perhaps it's a goal we need to set for 2026. Go further out. Maybe our expectations themselves need to be reset. And I'm not talking about lowering the bar to the point where anything would be an improvement, or in fact, seeing any movement of the needle, no matter how insignificant, as greater than it is. Speaking more about how we look for those things and what we find. Maybe a more quantitative approach. Casting our nets wide enough. And if we wish to remain positive, which hope that we do. And we need to focus on more than just the same half dozen or so concepts of public interest that seem to be brought up over and over again. Maybe we need to look inward a bit more. No. Coming from me, I understand how this could seem a big pill to swallow. I consider myself a pessimist at the best of times. It's all arbitrary. On some level, everything's equal importance, which is the same thing as saying everything is of equal unimportance, which is to say everything is unimportant, which is to say nothing matters. But I can still enjoy the smell of some 18-month-old stale tobacco and the corresponding noises that its baggie makes. And the dim candle held up against the fires of, well, take your pick. The point being, observe the candle anyway. What's next? Shoe shine brush. I actually did get this brush with the intention of using it to clean my shoes. And yet the moment I ran my thumb over its coarse bristles, there was no going back. Can't say what they're made of because I don't know. They certainly seem synthetic. Beyond that, no clue. synthetic. As opposed to organic, with the sort of negative connotations that consumption, whether it be literal or more abstract, that is, I don't have to eat it. To be an active participant in its consumption from supply and demand viewpoint. And then again, if nothing matters, nothing matters. I would add a proviso to that statement. Which would be nothing matters except suffering. And limiting suffering in ourselves and others as much as we possibly can. It's the old Schopenhauer and canard I trot out seemingly every time I open my mouth. Pleasure as a state of negativity. It is pleasure as being defined as a state without pain and not an inherent state on its own. Which is to say, if I am not suffering in a particular way, I am experiencing pleasure in that way. Perhaps you've experienced moments like this. Moments where you've been carrying a weight. Perhaps a weight you weren't even aware you were carrying. And once that weight was lifted, the delta between your experience when you had the weight and when it was removed can only be described as pleasure. There's certainly an argument to be made that there's states of pleasure that exceed the state of simply not suffering. However, the counter-argument to that is that those particular ephemeral states of pleasure don't matter, relatively speaking. And that what we, the species, should be concentrating on is not the promotion of pleasure, but the elimination of pain. This is negative utilitarianism, of course. And there's another very, it's It's a philosophical argument. It's not a practical argument. Then we're speaking of philosophy anyway, so a philosophical counter-argument to that is, well, if the only thing that matters is stopping suffering, then you had the ability, through the press of a single button, to instantly and painlessly snuff out all life in the universe. You would be obliged to press that button. This was presented as a counter-argument to negative utilitarianism. Of course, it has no real-world application. It's simply an epistemological argument because Thanos doesn't really exist. And if beings like Thanos could exist, perhaps we'd have to re-examine a lot more than our personal philosophies. Oh, shoe cleaning brush. You would have been so wasted on my Skechers. People often tell me in videos, comments, hey, shut up. Make with the triggers. Stop your tongue wagging. Consider these suggestions from time to time. After all, I exist only to serve you. However, after contemplation, I usually come to the conclusion that these commenters can soak their heads until the bubbles stop. And they don't have to be a part of the conversation anymore. I dislike winter. You might say, well, so do most people. say something so banal and pointless. Because it's winter now. And it has an effect on my mood, and I expect for the majority of you, an effect on your mood. It might have a positive effect on your mood. If that's the case, I suggest therapy. Someone is going to argue the case for 9 hours of sunshine a day. And hey, it's not like I'm a sunbather. In case you couldn't tell. So I thought it worth at least mentioning here. Phoenician sailor, you might say. Why isn't this a role play? Why don't you have an elaborate costume? Some high concept idea or story. My response to you is, it is winter, and I dislike winter. You've done good. Shoe brush. Oh, look. I'm sure you've seen these around if you are a consumer of ASMR content. Most of the time, if I see someone using something particular in ASMR videos, I will eschew that. Not because I think I'm better than anybody. I don't, believe me. I just want to try something different. However, these things came on the scene with such gusto sometime late last year, mid last year. The idea of essentially being able to reuse bubble wrap in silicone form. Too good an idea to pass up. Too good. I don't know that I love the sound, but I do love the tactile feeling that it gives. So maybe it will only give you a short appearance here. deck of cards represent so much. To so many different people. Bridge, poker, magic. I find it fascinating how gaming has evolved over the last 20 years to the point where we have created experiences to mimic other experiences that only existed because there was a limitation to be overcome. So, when we did not have sophisticated enough computers to create immersive worlds, we created those worlds using board games and card games. These were the mothers of invention, these needs and these limitations. And now we use those same computers, which initially solved some of those limitations, to emulate the medium that was part of the force behind the creation of those more sophisticated systems to begin with. There is something about the feel of shuffling a deck of cards. I can't quite put my finger on it. These cards are entirely made of plastic, or so they say, and yet their ingredients include cellulose. So really they're just impregnated paper. Seems a little strange to advertise them as completely plastic. But there you go. What's next? This brush. I purchased this brush, I want to say 6 years ago, in a barber supply store, Tamiami Trail, Miami, Florida. Preparation for a barber video I was planning on shooting. It's lost very few of its bristles. In the intervening time, and occasionally I will go back and look at the very old video. For me, 5, 6 years old. and be able to remember very specific, minor things that occurred during the shooting of that video, such that it seems impossible to me that so much time could have passed. Then I lament, curl into a ball, and mourn the future 6 years from this moment, when and where, if I am lucky, I might look back upon this video and think, you still had hair. I'm talking about the brush. Or am I talking about the brush? Am I talking about the brush? I should make a note to my psychoanalyst. Ask her if I am talking about the brush when I mention loss of hair. Alrighty then. It's effective, I think. Especially on a microphone with a large diaphragm and a metal grill like this. Doesn't work quite so well against foam. Are you sleeping yet? Maybe I should have mentioned that at the start of the video. The entire point of this is for you to go to sleep. Or at least to rest. Relax. You could start the video over now if you came into it with another set of expectations. Too good for my view count. Or just put it on loop. Fall asleep. I'm sure Raid Shadow Legends will thank you. What else do we have? This tube of aluminum foil, which I've also had at least a good 5 years. chance of talking to someone down an aluminum foil tube, which would be literally accurate. But maybe, depending on your age, it might evoke a time when you developed a method of communicating with a friend or sibling using a pair of cups and a waxed string. Let me say something about that. There was an idea that was sold to many of my generation and some later. The idea appeared in commercials, activity booklets for children. The idea was that you could take 2 paper cups and attach them with a length of waxed string. You'd rub a candle along the length of, or some such. You'd poke a hole in the bottom of each cup, or run the string up through the bottom of that cup and tie a large enough knot that the string could not come back out of the hole. And then you and your friend could stand around the corner from each other, your house or outside your house. Again, the idea sold was one of you would speak into one of the cups, and the other would put the cup up to their ear, and that you would be able to hear what your friend was saying, even if they were speaking very quietly from quite some distance away. I can't tell you how many times I tried that experiment, and for me at least, it never worked. I don't know what I did wrong, or if it's a flawed conceit. Maybe I was expecting too much, but those vibrations just didn't transmit in the way that they were advertised. Nowadays, they would be more likely to sell you something like that, rather than have you build it yourself. And yet, at many science museums, you might see these things called whisper dishes. They're giant parabolic dishes with the focus being a place that you could speak into, and then there'll be another parabolic dish behind the first one, of course, some distance away, with the same apparatus for one person to put their ear to. And those work so well, you would not be blamed for thinking that there were some electronic assistance going on there. But there's not. So if you want to experience something like that, I would suggest going to a science museum and not going through the bother of getting paper cups and waxing string and tying knots. It could take you upwards of half an hour to get that project done. And I'm almost guaranteeing you will not be impressed by the outcome. I'm sure It seems like with the dawn of fidget cubes, all sorts of tactile and sensory devices were manufactured. Many of them were taken from the kinds of play tools that would be used for those on the spectrum. And people soon came to realize that you don't have to be either. You don't have to be on the spectrum to require or want some form of self-soothing, or perhaps the spectrum is much wider than we even imagine it. The spectrum becomes that wide. You wouldn't be faulted for wondering if it really has any function at all. So it's more likely that self-soothing is a need of neurotypicals as well. Anyway, all sorts of these things started coming out. I had always been a fan of Jiffy Pop popcorn, which is essentially a bunch of kernels of corn in an aluminum foil pan with an expandable top that would kind of inflate as you, on a stovetop, cooked it, and the popcorn expanded in volume as the kernels popped. To try and recreate that, I had purchased some ventilation, some ventilation tubing. It's sort of like a squeeze box accordion. You could squeeze it back and forth and it would make a sound not dissimilar to these. A little less harsh. But now, of course, you see these ASMR videos all over as well. Finally, this is actually one of my all-time favorites. I'm pretty sure they're just pieces of plastic in there, but it's the shape. There's a bit of grit to them. It makes me think of large crystals of salt. But they don't break down like salt would if you did this for any appreciable length of time. Oh yeah, I'm a fan of that. There's a metal ball version of it as well. bit harsher. I think this one is better for, again, the tactile feel more so than the sounds. I take this one. Let's end with some grooming. Beard is starting to get a little unruly. Now these bristles, I don't believe are synthetic. Badger hair, perhaps, I don't know. My apologies to the badger. So, as we move through life, let's try to be aware of the suffering of others and do what we can to mitigate that suffering. There's so many ways to suffer. So many different experiences, so many different things you can do that will cause suffering that you just aren't aware of. When I say you, I mean me. The existence of this brush caused suffering. Any kind of consumption really causes suffering. We can't all be monks. Or I guess we could, but what good would a society be if it were just locked in a state of eternal bliss? We need conflict as our impetus for forward motion and forward. It's very arbitrary. Let's just say change, for better or worse.